Good morning, everyone. My name is Jesus Pantel. I am the Cultural Funding Supervisor for the City of Austin Economic Development Department's Cultural Arts Division. We are on day 5 of our Elevate review panels for individuals and creative businesses. We have Jasmine Patel here as well, our outside equity facilitator, ensuring that both city staff as well as the review panelists keep equity in mind while we are reviewing these applications. The panel has reviewed all of the applications prior to today and will be providing their commentary on the applications. They may or may not change their scores depending on the feedback provided by their fellow panelists. So we are not working on consensus. So panelists may have different takes, which is fine. We have asked the panelists not to compare one application to another, but just to score the application based on how it addresses the review criteria. We have also asked the panelists not to repeat anything that has been stated by our previous panelists. So if it is quiet or a panelist is not providing commentary, that means they are in agreement with what has been said by the other panelists. And so let me see if there's anything else. We do have a 10-minute maximum time limit per application. I will be timing those. I'm getting my timer ready now. If for any reason we have any kind of technical difficulties, we will pause the timer and the recording if necessary. So that way the application gets the full 10-minute allocation. We have been going slightly ahead of schedule. So haven't really had to worry about that. But if we do get down to about 2 minutes or less, panel, I did not mention this earlier, but I'll give a 2-minute countdown, 1-minute countdown, 30 seconds with a raised fist, and then when we have 10 seconds left to review the application. So we ask that the panelists look beyond grantsmanship to the extent possible. They can use firsthand experience, so if they're familiar with either you or your work, or if they went to your website or your social media, they were not required to do so, but if they did do so, they can take that into consideration as they are scoring and reviewing your applications. So with all that being said, we will get started. And our first application up for review is Family Never Divide, LLC. Amrutha and Margaret are our primary and secondary. And the timer will start whenever Amrutha starts giving her comments.
Hello, I went through the application and it was interesting, but I really thought that there should have been more. Like I wanted the application to have more details about the populations they served and the kind of marketing that they were going to have for the events that they presented. So yeah. This is for Family Never Divide LLC.
Yes, thank you. Secondary, Margaret.
Hello, everyone. I noted that Family Never Divide, Don Otto, the Eskimo Initiative project, he is wanting to serve key constituencies of the urban and underrepresented part of Austin. And their creative mission is to influence the next generation of creatives. The artist really desires to develop a more sustainable platform for his events. And rather than partner with promoters or club managers, he'd like to host his own events. There wasn't as much detail as I had hoped to see, particularly offered in the budget, and he devoted the entire $30,000 entirely to artist fees, which, we love paying artists, but with all the elements that go into hosting an event, money towards marketing, money towards accessibility, it would have been great to see those areas, listed out and more developed. I will say I really enjoyed his music and his videos that he shared via the work samples. So thank you for that. And it was, it was an application which, you know, hopefully can be a little more developed. Again, if he does apply, which I encourage him to do so. So that's what I've got.
Thank you, Margaret, for providing that information. Do others have things that they'd like to add, either things that they liked about this application or constructive feedback related to this one?
I would just add that I think that I agree. I listened to his music and was impressed, but ultimately the application was just missing foundational requested information and regarding particularly key constituents, and then specifically the events being proposed, which I think are important elements, obviously, of the grant application. So there were a lot of questions actually left unanswered. So that just made it difficult for us to assess it within the grant guidelines. So.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, panelists. If there are no additional comments, different thoughts, divergent opinions, seeing as there are no additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so by raising your hand. Barb, Mike, Margaret, and Amrutha, and Susan. All righty. Thank you, everyone. Let's see. The next application up for review is South and East Austin Murals. Barb and Amrutha are our primary and secondary. And Barb, whenever you're ready to begin.
So this applicant is applying for a grant to essentially create a mural within the very changing communities of South and East Austin. Sorry, I'm getting back to my section here. Ultimately, I think this project is a really interesting project, and considering how much Austin is changing, those neighborhoods in particular, I think the messaging behind it is a really interesting one and something that would be valuable to Austin, since those neighborhoods may not even exist like they are in another 10 years. But some of the issues in the grant application regarding the reviewing guidelines were the key constituents described in the project seem to be largely within the South and East Austin communities, but not particularly defined within the communities that are key constituents in the grant application. So the messaging from the neighborhood constituents does include those from marginalized backgrounds per the application, but it doesn't appear to be rooted in those communities. As far as the history of service, this applicant clearly has a history of service within marginalized communities from the art project she's done in the past, and has spearheaded programs offering opportunity and accessibility, but it doesn't seem to be built into this particular application. And a more defined key constituency would have been helpful to determine how the applicant actually has lived experience with these communities. And then regarding the cultural activity, more details about how the mural would be created, as well as the artistic choices that would be part of the mural project, would have been helpful in the application. How those communities, as part of the grant, would have been involved in what ends up being that mural, and how they'll be able to participate artistically would have been helpful to have included in here. Intersectionality was represented, and there were a couple of other positives with like accessibility, that creating an app for the mural project I thought was a pretty cool concept. And would it was a question I had was, would it have translation ability in addition to that to make it language accessible as well? Marketing efforts were largely there, not completely checking all the boxes, but and then the budget I felt was it doesn't really outline how many artists would participate in that project. That would have been helpful information. There was just a single line item. The marketing budget seemed a little small, but overall, I thought the budget was reasonable. And it seems like a really worthy project. I just didn't feel like some of the key components of the grant requirements were addressed.
Thank you. Secondary, Amrita?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Barbara has already shared. Um, I I really like the focus on having different groups be a part of it, especially the multilingual part of the application was well defined and how they would provide these services. But like the language accessibility is what I'm talking about. But what exactly is the activity that is going to happen, that would if that was more defined, it would have given them more points in the application. Yeah, I think that's it. But and a lot of what Barbara has already covered vis-a-vis each, she's derailed each of the points. But yeah, I would, because that kind of not having a very defined activity then reflects off into how are they going to market it, how are they going to budget it, and it just felt like they had put in large chunks into the budget sections too. So yeah, but overall I'm really intrigued by the project.
All right, thank you, panelists. Is there anything else to add in terms of, yeah, what we may have liked or constructive feedback, folks we maybe haven't heard from? Yeah, Mike?
I was really intrigued by this project. And one thing I thought was an advantage of it that I would have liked for them to take more advantage of is that it's a site-specific project, and they're referring very often to South and East Austin. And these are very diverse areas. So it's hard for me to identify which are the actual constituencies within those geographies. You know, this way we would have been able to really dial in and say, hey, I want to do a mural, and here are some specific locations within South and East Austin. Here are the people that live there. And that's an opportunity to really, with a fine point, come in and identify those key constituencies and how you're going to serve them. And I felt like the lack of that kind of hamstrung the application in almost every question, because I don't know who you're talking about. I know there's a lot of different people that live in South and East Austin.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, Margaret.
I just wanted to share the note. I really enjoyed their work sample, and I appreciated their thoughts around using the arts as a tool to encourage dialogue and empower communities.
Thank you. Susan, did you have anything to add?
I was just going to say, I agree with Mike that a lot of the things that they put in the proposal were implied, and they didn't have any documentation to support it. But overall, I like the concept.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I know everyone is gone, but any additional comments or thoughts that you have that maybe weren't covered by other panelists? Seeing as there are no additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Barb, Mike, Amrita, Margaret. And just so the applicant is aware, if they're watching now or are watching later, the 10-minute time for the application, they're not discussing the application anymore. So as they're finalizing their scores, that does not eat into the time. The timing has stopped. We will just finalize this score before moving on to the next application. And Susan, were you done scoring this application, or did you need some more time for the South and East Austin murals? Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you.
I'll finalize it for now.
Okay, you're finalized. Okay, we will move on to the next application then, which is Rotten Banana. Susan and Barbara are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, the goal of the Rotten Banana Project was to identify neurodivergent people who had a generally appreciative of art. The proposal was very vague. A lot of statements were implied with no documentation to support what they would be doing. They asked for a budget of $2,150. So it made it very difficult to score this proposal on their mission, because all of the emphasis was on the person who wrote the proposal and what they did. The history of service was vague. The cultural leadership was vague. And then when they talked about language accessibility, there was a need for that, but there was nothing in the budget to detail the language accessibility. So I'm not sure what activity would be proposed, because in the budget, they had things like lights, canvas, paint. And then for marketing, they had help with website. There was no addressing accessibility needs.
Thank you. Secondary, Barbara?
I think Susan pretty much covered it all. I mean, it simply to me was an issue with the applicant not having defined enough information per the grant application guidelines so that we could truly assess it. You know, anything from who they serve specifically and how they're going to give what those goals and outcomes were to the actual project, which doesn't really exist in here. So that's it.
Thank you, Susan and Barbara. Is there anything that folks want to add that hasn't already been said, either in terms of what they liked or additional constructive feedback that hasn't been named yet?
Yeah, I just thought that, I'm sorry. I just thought that they needed more guidance. So if they are going to apply for any grants in future, it would be better to have, like, consult somebody to define what their objectives are and to get some help to write the grant itself. So there might be a good project there, but we are not seeing it because the application is not well fleshed out, is what I thought.
Thank you, Amrita. We'll take Margaret and then Mike.
I was just going to note, I enjoyed their work samples, beautiful works of art, and want to encourage the artists, next time. I know they were probably trying to be modest with their asks, but make sure you ask for enough money to get the project done. So no one will fault you for asking for a little bit more money to really help a project thrive. That's it.
Mike, did you have things you wanted to add?
Just quickly for future applications, they could really use the questions as a map. You know, some of the information is listed that could give you a specific goal thing to write about. For marketing, for example, the specific audiences we're interested in are listed in the question. The kinds of audiences, and for intersectionality, the definition, Crenshaw's definition is super helpful. You can read that and think about how does it apply to your project. So just using the questions as a map.
Thank you. All right, are there any additional things that panelists want to add? All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I will say we have asked the panelists to provide constructive criticism and feedback for future improvement. I mentioned earlier also about looking beyond grantsmanship to the extent possible. So with that being said, there still needs to be enough information in the application, or, you know, if they're knowledgeable about your work or went to your website or social media. So we are asking them to look beyond grantsmanship, but they do have to score based on the information that is provided in the application. So just wanted to clarify that. If there are no further comments from the panel, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Barbara, Mike, Margaret,
Yes.
Susan, and Amrita.
Yes.
Great, thanks, y'all. Next application up for review is Kel Brown. Susan and Amrita are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. Kel Brown is proposing to do art activities that will culminate with a festival. This proposal was well documented on his past experience working with the community, and he identified every activity that he's proposing to do, and he included language accessibility, wheelchair accessibility, and he described how he would market his program, and his budget of $30,000 identified all of the activities that would support his budget requests. He did an excellent job, I thought, in proposing each activity. I wish he could have given a little bit more detail on some of the activities, but he described them well. So
Hey,
that's
Susan. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yes, I said that's an overview.
Okay, great. Thank you. And secondary, Amrita. And I will pause the timer while Amrita is pulling her notes up. And while we're doing that, Susan, I don't know if you know this or not, but your camera went off, just so you're aware of that.
Sorry.
Amrita, are you ready for your comments?
Yes. So I just thought that though the activities are well defined, they kind of missed out on the specific constituencies that the city is targeting for right now. So that and also like the intersectionality, that kind of made them, like, just by the scoring rubric that we have, going by the scoring rubric that we have. But overall, it was a good application, well written application. However, it just did not, for me, satisfy the criteria that the city is looking for funding right now. And the other panelists might have a different take on it. So
Yes, are there additional comments related to this application?
Yeah, I did not see the questions answered in the with the specifics to the application. This person did not really define the key constituents. They defined it as, the way I read it, as general public, and there was no details about equity within their programming. I felt like they outlined service to the regional arts community as a whole without defining how those opportunities created by their programming will be directed towards a specific audience and how it will improve access or opportunity for that audience. The details given in the application, weren't really in regard to the key constituents, and the leadership was not tied to those key constituents just within the application answers. And then I think that in particular, the cultural activities, the public art events had no specific information regarding what they would be, when they would be held, who's going to be served, what will be presented, all those things that I feel like would have been incredibly helpful to us to make sure that it was actually fulfilling what the spirit of the grant is about. But even with intersectionality, they address it, but they didn't give any examples of the audience identities that would be considered for programming or how those participants would be included. So I just felt like there were a lot of details missing in this. Like, this person, I feel like, was, trying to fill the application out, giving us the details we wanted, but they didn't go deep enough into it to help us answer the questions directly against the guidelines. So, and I would encourage them to go back, apply again in the future, but with more detail.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Are there any other comments from panelists? Yes, Margaret.
I just thought I'd share, I appreciate the artist dedication to Austin and its creatives, and wish him luck with his continued work. I would have liked to have seen more detail in his marketing plan for the project. It lacks some specific examples of how he was going to reach. It was more in broad strokes. So but keep on serving the creative community in Austin, and you're doing great things.
Mike, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just would recommend just really honing in on the key constituencies. There are some identified, but none that I could see that are at immediate risk of displacement or cultural erasure. It's just not apparent that the application is focused on reaching underserved communities, and that for this particular grant, that point just continues, and it's so relevant to every question. And just next time, maybe look at honing in on that idea.
Thank you. Any more comments from panelists? All right, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. I know everyone's had a chance to voice their opinions. If there are no other additional comments, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Barb, Ruta, Margaret, Mike, and Susan, I see you're nodding your head, so you're good too. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Next application up for review is Odett Garza-Weatherspoon. Mike and Barb are primary and secondary, and Mike, whenever you're ready to begin. Oh, and you're muted, so the timing will start when you're unmute and giving your comments.
My bad. Hi. All right. The applicant requests $29,200 to create a documentary film focused on the preserving Mexican American women's stories and culture, and will host screenings of the film with community conversations attached. Key constituency is clearly identified as the Mexican American community. I thought their passion and personal investment in the project were super clear. Where I struggled with the application was that I thought most of the responses are very bare bones and a lot are very general. In many sections, there is enough there to check the boxes to score well in several of the fundamental categories, kind of just getting over the line. The categories that I felt I would like to see more in history of service, reading the narrative. You know, it does show that their history is more broader and general, and they don't really address their key constituency until, frankly, almost the end of their narrative. There's 5 paragraphs and they don't mention them until the 4th. So it seems that, you know, they've evolved into serving that constituency, so that, you know, gets them a bit lower score. I felt like in both accessibility and language access, there's no plan for implementation. And that the marketing was it's a very broad general marketing plan description. It doesn't specifically address the audiences or market sectors that are listed in the question. So that would be definitely, I think that would be an area for improvement.
Thank you. Secondary, Barb?
Yeah, I thought this project overall seemed like a really worthy subject matter, and that there was a lot of potential exploration within our own community to be able to fulfill something like this in a way that would have resonance with an audience. Some of the issues that I saw within the proposal were some of what Mike has already shared, but also the scope of the documentary project is really important to be able to assess the budget and the marketing aspects of it. I think it's really interesting that she's going to be doing public events to actually take those interviews and create a documentary out of that. You know, I think the artistic ability here it's an interesting way of presenting something and finding an audience within your documentary from those public offerings. But the scope of that documentary really is not addressed in this. And so is this something they're intending to be a 10-minute documentary, or is it something they're intending to be a full-length documentary? That would be really important information to be able to address whether the budget is applicable for this kind of project. And sorry, I'm trying to get my computer to get me there to my notes. So to me, it seemed like a really timely subject. And some things were outlined well, but some of the missing details made it difficult to assess the budget in particular. And I felt like some of the things in the budget were inadequate, marketing in particular. You know, festival entry fees seemed a little underfunded in there based on how they're trying to get this out to the public. And it just seemed like if they were going to be doing a number of public events, maybe I couldn't tell if they were fully addressed from the budget, if they would be enough to pull off what they're trying to do here. And then just some of the questions just didn't have complete answers. But overall, I think the audience served definitely is within the grant guidelines and subject matter as well.
Thank you. Before we move on to comments from other panelists, staff has only done a cursory glance at these applications, but I am following along as the panelists are making comments. In the budget, to the point about more details on how, you know, I guess how long or how big the documentary is, they do say in a number of different budget line items, if it's helpful, that they will be for 5 days of filming. So for whatever that is worth, just pointing that out is listed in the budget. With that being said, open it up to comments from other panelists.
All right, if there are no additional comments, I think can close out of this one.
All righty. Seeing as there are none, no differing opinions or thoughts that haven't been stated by one of the primary or secondary already. Seeing as there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Mike, everybody. Yes, alrighty. Thank you, everyone. All right, next application up for review is Cierra Aiken. Margaret and Mike are our primary and secondary. And Margaret, whenever you're ready to begin. Oh, and you are muted, so the timer will start when you're unmuted.
I apologize, everyone. Cierra Aiken, the artist, she is asking for a grant for the Danny Pearl music. She lists her key constituencies as listeners, fans, fellow musicians, and collaborators, which doesn't necessarily overlap with those of Austin, but it's maybe in more broad general population. Her creative mission is to use music to inspire and bring people together, creating a shared experience that transcends the ordinary. She looks to organize a series of community concerts and workshops aimed at promoting good mental health and spiritual health through music. And the concerts will take place across the city at parks, community centers, and schools, for example, throughout the year. She plans to offer low-cost or free admission as a measure of accessibility. And as an extension of her performances, she plans to connect with people through her recorded music, videos, and digital engagement. She says she seeks to include people of different races, genders, sexual orientations, abilities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. She plans to include captioning and space for those with physical disabilities and accommodations for those with sensory challenges. She plans to have ASL interpretation at some events, and her captioning is translatable to many languages in her videos. Her marketing plan includes live performances, streaming music, and social media engagement, which she hopes to reach new audiences, including tourists. Her budget includes more details about her plan. She did include some work samples that were really enjoyable. And those are my notes for Cierra Aiken's project.
Great, thank you. Secondary, Mike? Oh, and you're muted.
I enjoyed the work samples very much. It was great. It was great to get to know more about the artist in that way. I felt like the key constituencies are an issue here. They've really just identified their audience, their following, their fans, the music community in a general way, not in any way that speaks to audiences that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure or displacement. It doesn't show that serving underserved communities is really central to the application in any way. And that's going to limit their success in many of the questions here. Basically, I would like them to tell us more about that audience. I don't know anything more about your audience other than that they're your audience. What kind of communities are there? What are the demographics? How do you describe them? What is their experience? How do I know if your lived experience relates to their lived experience? You're not painting a picture of who the people are. And I can kind of imply from context from your work samples of stuff that I bet it is a diverse audience, but it doesn't show that anywhere. So that would be, I think, a real opportunity to increase your success in future applications. Also, I know it wasn't clear to me how many events you're doing. It was sort of a general, I want to do events, I want to do them in Austin. More specificity there lets us know, is your budget sufficient? Is your marketing going to work? That's an important piece.
Great, thank you, Mike. Are there additional comments from panelists, things that haven't already been said? You know, Barbara, Susan, if there are thoughts, would love to hear. Constructive.
Oh, sorry. I would, I'd say one of the things that I think is a real benefit of this cultural arts application from the city is that there's questions in here about a number of places within these grant questions that are how are the key constituents going to be served creatively and through opportunities. I think that's a really core element and a great one for any artist, right, to consider. And this application really didn't answer those questions about whatever their audience is, how the programming here for mental health was actually going to fulfill that mission through opportunities and through the creative programming. And that would have been really helpful for this artist to think about how to include that in here, because obviously it always helps an artist's programming to consider what their goals are. So anyway, that was it.
Susan, was there anything you'd like to add?
No,
I
Thank
just
you.
wanted to have like a sentence. Throughout this scoring process, I have seen that the artists and nonprofits who have given one or two events and detailed about them and wrote about them and budgeted them properly have scored much higher versus those who have said that I will do 3 or 4, it will be throughout the year, it will be probably at these places. So this is for everyone who's listening to this and going to apply for the future, to have like very specific uh, events that they are budgeting towards. And then the marketing and those plans become easier to have in your application, is what I felt. That's it.
Thank you,
Great.
Amrita.
Yes, thank you for that, Amrita. And I know you're not comparing one application to another, you're just providing some insight into how it would make this application stronger. So, but just clarifying that for the applicant, if they're watching live or watching this later, that we do ask the panelists not to compare applications against each other, just how are they meeting the review criteria. And so Amrita, we also ask the panelists to give constructive criticism and feedback for future improvement. So that's what that comment was for. I believe everybody has gone, but any additional comments or thoughts that you have that have not been stated by other panelists? Seeing as there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Barb, Mike, Margaret, Amrita, and Susan. All right, and it is 11 o'clock. We are right on schedule for our first break, so we will pause the recording for now.
Recording in progress.
We are back from break and continuing our review panel. So we are Elevate Individuals and Creative Businesses. Let me pull up our next application up for review, which will be Otto the Make Belief. Amrita and Margaret are our primary and secondary. And as soon as I get my timer ready, it is ready. So Amrita, whenever you are ready to start with your comments.
I need a moment for my computer to function.
Sure. So the timer has not started yet. It will start whenever Amrita starts giving her comments.
Where is it? I can't find it. All right, I have it up on the screen. So this is this application doesn't really define the, like it has an event, but they don't define how it addresses the intersectionality and the key constituents that the city of Austin is looking to have for these particular activities, that the funding that they're receiving. And that is why it scores lower on the scores. And also, again, that reflects on, like, they have one event that they are trying to promote, but that also reflects on how they are marketing it. Like, it's not very well defined in terms of what we are looking from a scoring perspective. It's very generalized, like the application felt very generalized to me and not specifically addressing even the questions that are there in the application system.
Thank you, Amrita. Secondary, Margaret?
Hello, Otto, the make-believe, the performer would like to hold a concert at the venue. And he says his goals is to draw tourists and others. I agree. I just wrote, I wanted more detail in this application. I was seeking more, and I actually added a note, tell me more. You know, here's your opportunity to, you know, share your grand plans through this application. And I just, I felt wanting. So those are my notes.
All right, are there any other comments from panelists related to this one?
I felt that the details were lacking in just about all the areas. They were implied, but the details weren't there.
Thank you.
The applicants, their passion for music and for what they do is really apparent there in the writing, but I agree there's not enough information here. I would point out that for future reference, the Department of Economic Development does offer resources in that you can come in and you know, before you submit your grant. I know that in the past they've done virtual and open office hours, and you can get people to give you some pointers, you know, towards your next application.
Thank you.
If there are no other comments, I will just say as a slight point of clarification, Mike is correct. We do offer those opportunities. They are not mandatory. They are optional application workshops, but we do offer those as Mike was suggesting. With that being said, additional comments from other panelists? Seeing as there are no further comments, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Barb, Amrita, Mike, Margaret, and Susan. Okay, great. Thanks, y'all. Next application up for review is Lone Star Festival. Barb and Amrita are our primary and secondary. And Barb, whenever you're ready to begin.
So this applicant is a nonprofit. They're applying for their cultural activity is for this grant's purpose is a 2-day festival. They do including books, film, music, a Guinness World Record competition held in the summer in Austin. And the event exists to promote Texas independent authors, and that's the actual parent organization that sponsors this 2-day festival. And their overall mission of the organization is to encourage and support Texas independent authors. And I think that's a very worthy endeavor. What I didn't see in this application is specifics about the key constituents that are part of the expectation of the grant application. They did not really define those key constituents that we're looking for in their questions, in particular in the first couple of questions, which is defining the people that they're serving and who they're doing the program for, their history of service. So that the audience they seem to be referring to in here is simply the audience of Texas independent authors and people who are interested in that world. They haven't really taken it more granular as to who the demographics of those two audiences are. And so it seems like they've really more evolved into serving the key constituents by serving a much more general audience. I did go to their programming and materials and see that they in fact have a pretty broad demographic of audience and are serving some of these key constituents. So seeing that information in the application would have been helpful in some demographic way, percentages of audience, et cetera. Their cultural leadership, some of the administration is rooted in the lived experience of those communities, but they again didn't really go into more detail about that in the application, so it was not easy to assess. It was sort of implied. We talked about what the actual program is. Regarding intersectionality, I feel like they did answer that question appropriately because they are going to such a broad audience. They were talking about the specific kind of programming that they did to some of these key constituents, and it would have really been helpful to see that throughout the entire application. They're doing some expanded ADA access, and language accessibility is in some cases included. Overall, their marketing and budgeting seem to fit their programming, but bottom line is they really didn't meet the criteria for the key constituents. So
Yeah, similar to what Barbara has just pointed out. So I think right off the bat in the first few comments, they have specified what are the key constituencies that they are serving. So it is more than 60% white, and that's okay, but it, like, going deeper into the application, it did feel as if it was more of a Texas authors specific event versus a more detailed event, as Barbara said, about the key constituencies that the city wants to target through these grants. So it did not really address those things. And then they have like mention about some ADA and some language accessibility things, but not really gone into how they would do that more than the federally mandated guidelines. So that also results. So like the general comment that I have here is that the organization is generally to Texas authors and not one specific program for the communities that we are targeting here. That's it.
All right, thank you all. Are there additional comments from panelists? Things that haven't already been said, things we liked, constructive feedback? All right, yes, Margaret.
Just one note, I felt like this was really written towards Texas authors as being the primary audience, which it may be. But, in reading it, I was thinking, boy, would I love to be there. And, an out-of-towner or tourist, somebody who loves books. So I think there could be broad appeal, but also a chance to really serve some audiences that aren't always included.
Thank you.
Same. I thought that when they're really describing a Texas-wide constituency, just a reminder that this is we're funding for an Austin-based program and really really target of that broader audience. What are the communities here in Austin that you are serving specifically, and what do they look like, and tell us that story.
Thank you.
Any additional comments from the panel? Differing opinions, anything stated, or you have that has not been stated by someone else?
Oh, I just wanted to point out this, that in their application, they state that their organizations composition is as follows, and then they give percentages of people associated, probably their members who have self-identified themselves as a particular race or ethnicity or a particular group. So if this was done for more applications, it would have been helpful. So it is something for the panelists and the organizers to think about in future iterations of the grant. That's it.
Thank you for that. And if the applicant is watching live or watching the recording, and for anyone else who is watching, the applicants do provide demographic information in sections 1 and 2, which the panelists do not see that information. So, so if the panelist is making that comment, or the panelist did make that comment, and just for applicants, just so you know, that information is not seen unless it's specifically mentioned. The demographic information that you provide is not seen unless specifically stated in section 3 of the application, where all of the questions are. So just so you're aware of that, panelists as well. With that being said, any other final comments, additional comments on this application? If there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Mike, Barb, Amruta, Margaret, and Susan. Okay, great. Thanks, y'all. Next application up for review is Jeannie Ramirez project. Susan and Barbara are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you are ready to begin.
Excuse me, the Jeannie Ramirez project is proposing to do a documentary, and she is basing her project on the need for including more women, based on her findings at the South by Southwest. A lack of women who are in STEM, and that portion of the proposal was well documented, and women over 50 who are not involved in the arts. Her proposed project is, once this documentary is completed, is to have a showing at Carver and Daughtry Arts Center, and then in Lockhart if the budget permits. And she breaks it out into 3 parts. She wants to talk about her experience being a cancer survivor, being an animal lover, and her band. So she's planning on having a festival as part of the showing of this documentary. She goes into great details about how she would use specialized language and accommodation for her audience, and her marketing plan for the project. She even identifies the consultant she proposes to use. And her budget is for the whole $30,000 So the bulk of the budget will be used for the development of the documentary. That's it.
Thank you, Susan. Secondary, Barb?
Yeah, so I guess what Susan has outlined out of the grant, where I had some big questions, is in the area of the scope of this documentary project, and then her public offering as part of the application. And again, I mean, Ms. Ramirez sounds like a fascinating subject for a documentary. She certainly has everything that an interesting documentary normally includes, which is a very robust personality and experiences that are very interesting, both to not just women, but culturally and from the music world and the art world, et cetera, that she's seemed to have intersected with all of these. That said, when we look at all the factors that are intertwined here, including the budget and the marketing, I'm not sure I understand exactly what the documentary is about. And a scope of that documentary, whether it's a feature or short, isn't really also clearly defined in here. And, you know, people can put information in about the days that they're shooting, but that doesn't really tell you what the documentary is going to be. So I feel like that material, there's so much material that Ms. Ramirez wants to cover. It lends itself to me to kind of like a feature documentary, and knowing more about how her team is going to take that material and per the grant guidelines, tie it back to her key constituents as far as something that they can walk away with creatively and with opportunity. I didn't see that in the application. I also actually don't see who her key constituents are clearly defined in the application. I see that it is, she literally starts out saying it's everybody. And then she outlines some of the key constituents as part of this grant. So this seems like a tremendous project, but the budget is not representative of that. As a documentary filmmaker, this is a pretty lean budget for something as significant as what Ms. Ramirez is laying out for us, and doesn't seem to include, you know, some of the expenses that would be required to do public offerings. Projecting film is expensive, renting venues is expensive. All these things I didn't really see broken out in a way that justified a budget this small for a project that large. So I left this application with an clear interest level in wanting to see this project, but with so many questions that I didn't feel like I saw them answered in here in a way that the grant is asking for. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Barbara. Do other panelists have comments that they'd like to add? Things that haven't already been said regarding the strengths or constructive feedback? Yeah, I agree that the key constituencies, I had to kind of infer in the narrative, she's talking mostly about Latina culture. And so I kind of inferred that as a key constituency, but it'd be really helpful to just say it and just state it, so we're not trying to sort of unravel it from the narrative. Marketing, the marketing plan is super general. Is really, I'm going to hire a publicist. And both the publicists that they list are very good ones, but it doesn't address any of the market sectors or audiences that are listed in the question at all. And then the last thing in the budget, there is part of the budget that is dedicated to
producing a screening in Lockhart. And so in my mind, that means it's unclear to me whether the budget is fully reflective of the application, and that's impacts their score.
Yeah, I will add just with what Mike said, that the budget for the people they're offering as PR people goes way beyond what they've included in this budget. I mean, we've worked with, significantly.
True, very true.
Thank you. We have just over 2 minutes left on this application. I will provide a bit of clarification in a bit, but wanted to open it up with our additional panelist comments before I do that. Margaret, go ahead.
I think we all agree this sounds like a really full and ambitious project. And it just left me wanting more details about a plan and maybe a timeline of action, or, how she was going to get it done. So I had that note.
Thank you. Other panelist comments? I will just say on the budget to the point about a screening in Lockhart, activities funded by us, if this was awarded funding, all activities would have to take place in Austin. The applicant can be located in the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, but over half of their work has to be in Austin, and any activities they fund need to be in Austin as well. The other thing I was going to mention about the budget is the minimum requirement, or what they're filling out is they need to show how they're showcasing the city request amount of $30,000. With that being said, we do at our optional application workshops let applicants know that they can put extra detail, or even if there is no matching requirement for this, but if they do have any match or any additional funds they would like to use, they can put that like in column C, and the right-hand column there. The middle column is for this. So I think the panelist comments are, germane. We've got about 30 seconds left, but also just keep that in mind is like, what we're asking for them there is to show how they're spending the city funds. But we do let them know that sometimes a more holistic view does give the panel a better, view of what the project will detail. So about 15 seconds left. Any final comments on this application? If there are none, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Mike, Barbara, Amruta, Margaret, and Susan. Alrighty, thank you everyone. Let's see, next application up for review is Paula Ward. Susan and Margaret are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you are ready to begin.
Under this proposal, they are proposing to seek funding for a project they're calling Mother Creator, which aims to bring together mothers from immigrant and long-standing Austin communities and other artists to create art together. So their proposal is, they're planning on having one-on-one support. They are planning on doing quarterly community workshops, and they will hold 2 gallery exhibits in partnership with local galleries. And he is basing this on when he lived in New York and how it was a creative opportunity to bring parents together, adults together, to focus on arts. Once again, I thought some things in the proposal were implied, but there were not enough details there. I'm not convinced that there were enough details there. in the budget, I was concerned about the large dollar amount for the building, and not knowing when they would use the building, for what they would use the building for. It was studio rental was the bulk of the budget. So that's my summary of this proposal.
Thank you. Secondary, Margaret?
Hello. I thought it was interesting with the project that bringing together mothers from immigrant and longstanding Austin communities and other artists to create art together, that she included childcare. I think that's so often not included, but so necessary in many ways. However, I saw it in the budget under accessibility, and I'm not sure that it really fits there. So that's something really for the city of Austin to potentially clarify. The work samples were gorgeous, and she included some nice letters of support. And I'll just say, in those regular meetups and creating together, networks are so vital in helping artists thrive and not, know they're not alone in the creative pursuit.
Great,
I
thank you,
think that-
Margaret. Are there other folks who want to share their thoughts on this one? Anything that hasn't already been said?
Yeah, I think the applicant, I think the project actually, I agree that it's a pretty cool project actually, fundamentally, for an artist, some kind of support service like this for artists in a very artist-oriented town. I think is a really interesting idea, and seems like it would be something that people would really connect with. They do define the creative goals, etc. I think that was done well. This person clearly has that history of service, but there were a couple of things in particular. We brought up the budget. Or first of all, I guess there's no details included how to address the proposed art studio, how that proposed art studio is going to directly benefit these marginalized women with specific opportunities, as the application requests. And then there is some confusion about the cultural activities. There's monthly gatherings and workshops and 2 exhibits proposed, but it's difficult to assess how these activities will actually impact the key constituents and how they'll involve equity, and how also they will be involved in the programming of what is going to be offered through this organization. Then there is a question I had when we get to the budget, about, sorry, I'm getting down to that in my, well, 2 things. They didn't really address marketing beyond the core demographic. There weren't a lot of details there, and it would have really been helpful to see more information. But the budget I found a little confusing. So I'm clarifying that everything these people are supposed to be budgeting in their applications is in fact over the year period of the grant, right? Like they can, if they're presenting it is over a year period, we can kind of assume it's supposed to be included in that budget. Okay. I think that some of where that confusion is probably having to do with that in this budget, because in fact, they're talking about not just single events, but a whole space for a year. And I just felt like rent and childcare, considering Austin, were very underfunded in this budget. And maybe there is a larger budget that we're not aware of. They're only looking at the $30,000 here. but for $10,000 for a year for studio space for a number, this many people, gosh, I want to know where that place is. I want to go rent it myself. So that and the fact that there is also, you know, childcare at a couple $1,000s for over a year period, that would be pretty minimal based on cost. So it just would be helpful to have had more detail in here about the budget, exactly what these funds, were they over a shorter period of time for that, or were they over the year? So.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Are there any other comments related to this application? Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. If there are no further comments, please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Barb, Amrutha, Mike, Margaret, and Susan. Okay, thanks, everyone. Next application up for review is Undying of Dementia, Animation Film and Launch of a Digital Arts and Humanitarian Site. Mike and Susan are our primary and secondary. And Mike, whenever you are ready to begin.
Very glad to get to speak on this application. The applicant wishes to create a short animation film and a digital website experience focusing on those impacted by dementia. They're requesting the full $30,000. A series of screenings and discussions would accompany the creation of the film. I felt this was a very compelling application. I thought that it is extremely personal and authentic. The narrative that they gave us, I felt like it was very much based on their lived experience and is a very, very strongly intersectional project. On their key constituencies, they're identifying a disability, a community experiencing disability. My personal firsthand experience, these communities do exist in Austin. I do believe that they are in danger of cultural displacement or erasure. They're largely invisible communities that do intersect many different genders, races, and ethnicities, and more strongly so, there are Black and brown people, queer communities are more heavily impacted by disability because of how it intersects with their cultural realities. I feel like it's a very genuine application. I appreciated the economy of language. It felt, everything they wrote felt meaningful, not fluffed up in any way. And I thought there was good, clear information. I thought the marketing was very well thought out. It was more than just a list, you know, to show their thought process and why the different marketing endeavors were important to them. So I'm going to thank the applicant for sharing this with us.
Thank you. Secondary, Susan?
I thought this was a well-written, well-documented proposal. And I scored it high.
Thank you. We do ask our panelists if, to provide feedback for constructive criticism and feedback for future improvements. So sometimes if it's a higher scoring application, in that panelist perspective, then there's not many comments to give. Divergent opinions, other thoughts or comments that have not been stated by the primary and secondary? No, Margaret? Yes, Margaret.
I just wanted to thank them for bringing awareness to caregiving and those in the Alzheimer community, and really taking on this tough, heartbreaking topic.
I just wanted to say that I think that this outline for the film and the work samples were pretty great, especially as far as messaging for what the documentary is proposing. And I just, really felt that the intersectionality in this application, if we're giving positive feedback here too, is the intersectionality is really well defined and, something that I think a lot of applicants have the opportunity to do probably, but this applicant had really thought about it, about how all of these different cultures intersect in this one subject matter that touches everybody, so that it wasn't looking just like a general audience, it was touching many audiences, and just was really, touched by this whole application. So did appreciate seeing a project like this coming through.
Thank you. Any other applicants? Amrita, do you have anything to add to this? All right. Cool, thanks.
Thanks. I think everybody has gone then. If there are no further comments, any thoughts that you have that haven't been stated by others? Seeing as there are none, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Amrita, Mike, and everybody else. All right, thanks y'all. And our next application up for review is Subatomic. Margaret and Mike are our primary and secondary. And Margaret, whenever you're ready to begin.
Yes, I have notes that Subatomic, pardon me, the project is seeking to increase diversity in film and television. The artist is hoping to connect with veteran, BIPOC, LGBTQIA, and Asian artists and filmmakers to create space and platforms for expression. They're trying to make sure that audiences or those in film and television are reflective of communities. And the artist is working to increase inclusion in film and television, and the organizer is a veteran filmmaker, and is a veteran who is a filmmaker, who seeks to include those narratives and actors. He's wanting to create a short film podcast series, panel discussions in the first half of 2025. I appreciated some of the detail in his budget. It gives a good sense of where the dollars will go, leading to a finished project. And it was nice to see inclusion really centered in this application. Those are my notes.
Thank you. Secondary, Mike.
Yeah, I very much agree. To me, the real strength in this application is how clearly the applicant's lived experience is just rooted in the answer to every question. I thought they drew a very clear line to why, not only why is this an important project, but why is it important that they do it? And that's really valuable. It's important that we see, yet you're the person to do this. I thought it was clear and successful in almost all the questions. The ones that I would like to see more in the accessibility and language access, I thought there was some proposals over the minimum requirements, but not much in terms of how they will be implemented. That would be an opportunity to improve the application. And marketing, again, really looking at the specific audiences and marketing goals that are listed in the question, and how do maybe think about organizing the question around that, your answer around that, and then talk about how your different strategies impact each of those audiences. There is a little bit of mention of marketing outside of our community, Houston and Dallas, but I thought there was enough marketing in market that was not a huge concern.
All right, thank you, Mike. Do others have comments to add?
Yeah, I would like to add just a couple of things about it. I mean, I agree with what the prior two panelists have said. I did find that the application had some things in it that I was a little confused by, and I wanted more clarity on, in particular in the budget in regard to the actual proposed activities. Because the proposed activities, in addition to being a short film, are a mini series podcast and then a live miniseries podcast that's going to be recorded, turned into a podcast, and then a live panel at some point where people can participate. And I felt the budget was confusing because it did not detail those projects broken out in here. Maybe they're in there, but I did not see them specifically. And those events are expensive. Those kinds of events are very expensive to put on, requires a lot more than just a rental space. And so I didn't see those documented in here. And one of the big questions I had about their key constituents was also, is it the artists that they're trying to bring in to filmmaking, which they outline quite well. But there were places where it was mentioned the audience and how they would, and I didn't see the outcomes from what seems inherent in this project for people to realize something for their own artistic career just as an audience member, drawing from specifically the key constituents audience of people who would be very interested in breaking into film or television or podcasting. I just didn't see that documented in here where there was an opportunity for it to be there. So the question I really had at the end of the application was, is this really an application for their film team and the film? And if so, how is the general public really a part of it? And how is that public going to benefit from the work, the really important work they're doing? So that was kind of it. I also agree that the marketing was not detailed enough for this kind of project, but great project.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Are there other comments the panelists have, things that haven't been said already? All right. Thank you.
If there are no further comments from the panel, seeing as there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Barbara, Amruta, Susan, Mike, and Margaret. All right. Thank you, everyone. We will pause the recording whenever you are. All right, and welcome back from lunch, everyone. We are continuing our Elevate review panel for individuals and creative businesses. I am Jesus Pantel, the Cultural Funding Supervisor. We have Jasmine Patel here as well, our outside equity facilitator, making sure that we keep equity center as we are reviewing these applications, both city staff and the review panelists. Keep equity top of mind. The panelists have reviewed all of the applications prior to today, and so we'll be providing their commentary based on the preliminary scores they have. They can change their scores. They are not required to do so. But they can change their scores depending on the feedback provided by their fellow panelists. We ask panelists not to repeat anything that has been stated by other panelists, but to, even if they have similar feelings about an application, if there is a comment that they do not have or that has not been stated by someone else, to go ahead and state that. We ask that the panels they're not required to score by consensus, so they're not trying to convince the other panelists to come to their score. They are giving feedback based on their knowledge and experience. They can use personal knowledge of the applicant, so of you and your work, but only personal firsthand knowledge. It can't be someone who's a friend of theirs said something. They can also go to your social media or your website and use that information, but otherwise they are scoring the application based on that kind of information and whatever is listed in the application. We will have a 10-minute maximum time to review each application. If anything kind of technical difficulty or anything comes up, we will pause the timer. So that way that application gets the full 10 minutes allocated to it. With that being said, we'll go ahead and start up with the next review up for next application up for review is Willie S Anderson, MED, A Golden Deed. Amruta and Margaret are our primary and secondary. And Amruta, whenever you're ready to begin.
So I really like the concept that they have stated here about teaching with heart, and they are an arts and crafts cultural festival. However, in the application, they have not specified about the key constituencies that the city is looking for. So that was kind of the one drawback that I found out about the application. And they, like, in general, the application feels like that there's a lot of data that might not necessarily be tailored specifically towards answering all the questions that are provided in the toolkit. So yeah, so I like the concept and the premise of the arts and crafts fair. However, this might not be the perfect project for what the city is looking for right now, is what I think.
Thank you. Secondary, Margaret.
That's me. Hello. You know, she is looking for funds for arts and crafts cultural festival. It's a one-day event related to wellness and a larger series of wellness events. She says she's using the principles of neuroaesthetics and approaching healing and burnout. Certainly mental health is an area we should all look to do more work. I will say a lot of her narrative is very broad at times and less kind of answering the questions directly or getting to the point of details within the application. I noted the marketing plan's very broad. There was more detail in the budget section. So, you know, sometimes you had to search to get the information, but some of it was there. Those are my notes.
All right, are there any additional comments from panelists, things that haven't been said yet?
But it's
What-
already been said, but I love the application concept, and it seems like this person has a history of service in this somewhat, which is clear in here. And I mean, we work with a lot of schools, and teacher burnout's a huge issue. And so anybody doing that kind of work certainly would be beneficial to the city overall. It just missed some of the details. It was lacking the details regarding specifics in the grant, primarily about key constituents and how the material that they're going to be programming and the proposed events would actually serve the audience that they're talking about, and then who that audience is. So I just want to encourage this person to, you know, kind of go back and look at this and in the answers to some of these questions that we couldn't assume. So.
Yeah, same. I feel like this was a lot of this is really compelling to read, and it was like, wow, this is an activity I would really like to go to. But I felt like there's a lot of these answers where you're just not, they're not answering the question that was asked. You know, like the activity itself, this reads kind of like a press release. There's a lot of just, it's a little flowery. There's a lot of descriptors and sort of big words, but not many specifics. It lacks the how. How do we do this? One specific thing I was really curious about, you mentioned the leader of the organization a lot by name, but who is he? Like, what is he, is there, is it, I think maybe you're assuming knowledge that isn't in the application. Like, I'd like to know who, it sounds like he's someone that I would really, like to know more about, but it's not really in there.
Yeah, and it's a woman. I found that information on her LinkedIn and some other places within the application that you had to go find it to go find the social media to find it. So that would have been really helpful too. Agree.
Amrita, was there stuff you wanted to add?
No, I said at the beginning.
All right, any additional comments from panelists?
I just had one more, actually. I just as a, they use the word diverse like many times during the application. Just think about how is it diverse? What is an example? Just using the word doesn't mean that it is. Like we need just think about more tangible specifics.
Right, so showing versus telling. All right, any additional commentary from panelists? All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Seeing as there are no additional comments, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Susan, Amrita, Margaret, Mike, and Barbara. Okay, thanks, everyone. Our next application up for review is Games Y'all. Barbara and Amrita are our primary and secondary. And Barbara, whenever you're ready to begin.
So I had heard of this organization here before. We've never worked with them, but I just had heard of them. And so it was really interesting reading this application that they have an organization that is that's goal is to make games, the creation, the playing, the community more open and actually offer opportunities for gamers in general, whether they're creating or just playing, to find to have opportunities, right, within that world. So apparently they've been around for quite a while, and they're focused here in Austin. And what they're asking for funding for is monthly meetups that they do within the organization, which they've demonstrated that through those monthly meetups, there is equity is in consideration at all times, and actual opportunities for advancement within those meetups as well. So they've identified very clearly their key constituency. They are well within the demographics of the key constituency of the grant requirements, and their mission is very much rooted in exactly what the grant is all about. The City of Austin's grant is all about, actually. Their history of service, they've demonstrated for many times, and you can see it throughout the application, service to their constituency, active leadership, actually amongst the core constituency, and they're clearly representative as leadership of the key constituency based on the demographics they presented. Again, very clear information, a lot of data they give that proves the request for the grant, and intersectionality seems to almost be foundational within the organization. It's kind of an expectation, so it certainly fits within this grant. They're proposing actually some of the most interesting and impactful additional adaptations for accessibility. And not only are they proposing it, but they actually explain it in here, which is I think is impressive. Their language accessibility is the same. Numerous examples of various language accessibility offerings for their key constituents. Marketing, they checked all the boxes on that. They definitely are doing a lot of marketing, I think, because they're also trying to expand their organization. The marketing for the meetup seems to fit well into that, and they seem to understand who their marketing is. And then as far as budgeting, I thought it seemed very reasonable. Everything was addressed in there that was in the grant application. And overall, I just think they're a really impressive organization. I'm kind of proud that we have them in Austin, Texas, to be honest. Not to gush, but I was really impressed with the service that they're doing in an area that's tough to serve. So that's it.
Thank you. Secondary, Amruta.
Yeah, pretty much a lot of what Barbara has already touched upon. And they actually go on to detail why they have these target groups that they are catering towards within their application. So that was really nice. And initially I thought, wait, they're asking funding for a series of monthly meetups. So how is that going to affect, or how is that, like, I could not wrap my head around that, but then their application kind of details and the budgetary allocations towards more of it is rentals and admin stuff. So that kind of fits, I thought, with the kind of activities that they are proposing. So, but mostly it is just because they have the target group right in their sites, and they're doing well with developing gamers and developing people, and more like an incubator of sorts. So I really like that application overall. Yep.
Great. Are there any additional comments from panelists? All right. Oh, yes, Margaret.
Sorry, my hand was, I think this application is to me so strong because of the activity in the kind of testing ground or sounding board factor of the creative process, you know, taking your project to a meeting where you can have people kind of workshop things with you is should be celebrated. So I think you know, I really applaud the project itself.
Me too. That was a great application, and it's so unique that I think in the beginnings that can be risky. You know, you're asking for something funding that is it does. You said it takes a minute to get your head around, but the application does such a great job in describing it. They answered the questions that were asked, and it's a really good combination of storytelling and art, and also like those tangible specifics. And I think it's a wonderful fit.
I did want to throw in there, just based on what we all said, that I think the meetup word in their application was a little confusing because it made it sound like it was something within that organization, but it is just like what it became clear is that it's actually open to the public. They are trying to draw the public out there. So the meetups aren't just their club, they're actually for public access.
Thank you for that. Any additional comments from the panel? Thoughts you have that haven't been, oh, Margaret, yes.
Sorry, one more thing. I appreciated in their budget that they included the in-kind donation from the Museum of Human Achievement. Looks like they've got a great partner there.
Thank you. Additional comments? Thoughts you have that haven't already been stated? If there are no further comments on this application, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Mike, Barbara, Amruta, Susan and Margaret. All right. Thank you, everyone. Next application up for review is Concerts for Human Harmony, Richard Rashaw Carson. Susan and Barbara are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin. Oh, and you're muted.
Sorry about that. This proposal proposed to do 3 concerts. And then reading it, 2 of the concerts, well, 3 of the concerts, the dates are for 24. So I don't know if they're planning on replicating these concerts in 2025, but they're June 24. So I'm confused about the dates, but they're basically to present performers from diverse cultures, including Japanese, Cuban, West African, African Americans, and so the proposal writer details his history in providing this service. Overall, the project is, if the dates are correct and what they've done in the past, they've well documented the audience, and that they can book these audience, and it looks good. So their budget was okay, but I was just concerned after going back and rereading, and they never said if they would be replicating these 3 concerts in 2025.
I will say, so staff has done a cursory review of applications, and I was following along with the primary's comments, and in the cultural activities, they do talk about, it's a record release party, but they say a record release party is part of our spring 2025 concert. Then they give a November 2024 date. Then they do say June 2024 and then September 6th after that, with no date on September 6th. So presumably that's just a typo. But the point is taken about, did make it a little bit unclear. If this application does score high enough to receive funding, we will work with the applicant to determine that the dates are all within the eligible time period. So with that being said, did you have any other comments as a primary, Susan? No? Okay. Secondary, Barbara? Oh, and you're muted.
I thought this applicant fulfilled the application request, did information really well, gave a lot of information about the audience, and then also past history of this particular applicant. Seems quite strong, with not only within the community, but a long-standing history of education about this genre of music. Was really impressive. So I have to actually say the descriptions of the project just made me want to go. So, which I think is kind of what we hope the public will do, as do they. So I felt like that everything in here pretty much met. I had the same question that Susan did, but assume that was a typo, because it seems like what they're trying to do is roll this out over a year with a variety of concerts. I couldn't tell either if they were going to be doing the same concert, or if it seemed like they were maybe talking about 3 different ones. So that were all sort of fitting within the same context. So overall, I thought it was well done. They had thoughtful marketing. I really appreciated the fact that they were going for a tourist base in here, that they were marketing in other cities, and it appears already have some resonance with audiences in other cities, so that they were actually using that as a way to bring people to Austin for this project. which not a lot of these applications have had that in it, but that certainly showed some thought. They gave a lot of detail in the marketing section. And then the budget also seemed reasonable to me, except that it's just, it's a lot of concert that they're doing. So I wasn't really sure in here exactly what portion of the budget was, if this was for the entire event. Is this the one that had, no, that if this was literally for the entire grouping of 3 events. They have it in some of the places in here that it shows the 3 events, but some of those numbers seem small when I look at a 3 event being melded into those marketing numbers, etc. So anyway, that's my feedback. Did have 1 or 2 questions about the budget, Ed.
Are there additional comments from panelists?
I had a similar question about the budget, about the marketing mentioned, but it looks like in the budget that they're saying that they are spending the money on local marketing, like on local papers. It says broadcast media, it says posters and handbills, which I would assume are local. So it doesn't, though they have marketed in other places, it doesn't look like they're asking to spend money on it. So that to me keeps them on the right side of things.
Mike? Any additional comments that haven't been stated yet?
If there are no further comments from the panel, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Margaret, Mike, Amrutha, Susan, and Barb. Alrighty, thank you everyone. Next application up for review is Cage Match Project. Susan and Amrutha are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, the Cage Match product, it's a site-specific art installation series, and it'll be an industrial cage trailer park in East Austin. And it's supported to create experimental artwork within the CMP theme of artists at work. It'll be open 24/7, 365 days a year as needed. And it's proposed for undergrads, I think, it's undergrad students. And so they've addressed diversity and who they will be serving. It will be accessible by having trained professionals administering adaptation. They will make available large print Braille books and other accessibility accommodations for their students. There is not a exact location where this would be located. Let's see, it was I felt that they answered the questions. They didn't go into any details, but the questions were answered. They were sometimes, excuse me, implied, but not detailed. But overall, it's a good question. I was trying to put my hands on the budget. So that's it.
Thank you. Secondary, Amrita?
So the application, though it is detailed and I kind of got lost in it, to be honest, because they start off with what the cage match project is, where it is like it's a trailer park art installation or some art installation. And then in what is your proposed public activity, they say that our proposed project responds to, so they are basically suggesting that through the grants that they would get through this, they want to host a series of workshops and networking events for people who are living in Austin and who identify as BIPOC, gender non-conforming, LGBTQIA+. And that is the key activity that they are then requesting the funds for in their budget. So it was just difficult to find and connect those two things for me. But overall, they their project is really interesting and very specific to what the grant is really looking to fund at this time, is what I thought it was. They have I really like the way that they have language accessibility set up in their art installations, but that was not clear whether they will have the same kind of setup for their workshops that they're proposing. So their art installations and everything have translations in various languages, but I don't know if they mentioned that their workshops would have the same kind of multilingual approach. And yeah, I really liked the project and the description and everything, but once I got to it, it was a difficult to point out what exactly they were trying to tell me, but that might just be me. I don't know.
Thank you, Amrita. Are there other panelists that want to add to the comments? Barbara?
So I had both opinions, matching both Susan's and Amrita's, but with confusion still left. So I felt like both projects seemed really cool, like the art installation thing in a big cage in some parking lot, that what they're talking about there. But then when you get to the part that's the workshop, it appears that that's actually what they're asking for the funds for. So I was very confused when I read. In fact, I thought I had to go back because I thought I was reading two different applications. I thought I confused them. And I almost removed all my notes and thought, oh, how did I do that? So that's how confusing I thought it was. So I do think the beginning of this application is confusing. I think they check the boxes, but I think what they're serving is confusing. And it leaves me with a big question still. Is that public art installation part of this proposal? Because it is the public facing piece of the application, even though it's not part of the activity. The activity doesn't seem to have a public facing part to it at all. From what I read, it seems to be for these artists in residency, which is also pretty cool. So, and needed, especially in a place where you can't even afford to get a studio anymore. So I think both sides of it seem really valuable. And the budget doesn't seem to be for the installation. It seems to be for the secondary piece. So I kind of feel like this application has a split personality somewhat. It's like, I don't know exactly what they're asking us for. And if it is for the residency, my question left is, well, what is your actual public facing event? Because the workshops they're talking about are for the artists. So that maybe I missed something because I was very confused here.
I agree. It's confusing. And like some of they're answering some of the questions in the wrong sections. The description of the project, the cultural activity is actually in key constituencies, kind of vice versa. What I took from it, I believe, like, and it just was like one you had to read over and over. What I'm inferring is it's the same place, and I'm inferring that because of the budget. It seems like the stuff that they're describing wanting to pay for is the things that are in the budget. If you look at some of the support materials about what's been created in the past in the installation, this is what it looks like to me. Like there's a podcast that was recorded there. There are different installations that were done. So this to me is a little bit of a quacks like a duck sort of thing. It would have been much more helpful if they would have clearly said, this is what we want to do. This is what we're asking for. This is how it happens and where it works. Because I feel like we are having to stretch here to get to it. I think that it checks all the boxes. I want to go to this thing. It sounds very awesome and exciting, but I do agree that it's confusing.
Can we get a budget clarification? Because I don't know how that works, but I don't say where's this. In the beginning, they talk about a thing that's parked somewhere. I believe so, right? But I don't. Where'd you see that, Mike, in the budget? I'm sorry, maybe I'm just missing it.
Well, I'm reading it as that's what the studio is. I think it's all created from the way they describe it. I think they do it all in the same space, and that's kind of the point of it.
Yeah.
And you can go and kind of watch it happen. But again, we're all having to interpret what they're saying here, you know. But I think it seems to me that it's all one location, and that everything happens in the cage, and that's kind of the point of the thing.
We have 30 seconds, Margaret.
In the budget, there was some confusion for me in the payment to artists, the amount requested or the part of the grant doesn't equal what the description is. So maybe they're getting funds from another source, but I didn't know or is it a math error? That's all.
6 seconds, final comments.
Okay, so I went to their website. It's confusing too. I don't know where the trailer is.
And we are done.
Okay.
Thank you. I muted myself, not my timer. So we are done discussing this application. My timer's not stopping. There we go. Panelists, if you will, please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Margaret? And if you need time to think on it, that's fine. We just cannot discuss this application anymore. Margaret, Amrita, Susan. Barbara. Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, and the next application up for review is No Culture Publishing. Mike and Margaret are our primary and secondary. And Mike, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. No Culture Publishing is asking for $30,000 to create a more than one thing. There's a theatrical play with author visits. There's a book creation and reading. So a variety of cultural activities. I think that this is a strong application. I think there's key constituencies identified. There's intersectionality. There's equity. That said, that was very difficult. There's sort of a lot of information just kind of packed together here. I would have loved to have a little bit more of a narrative that sort of tells the story. I feel like there's just a lot of lists of information in the answers. I found the mission statement in the wrong section. That said, I think it's all there. I think it's all in there. I think there's sort of the building blocks of the raw information that indicates lived experience, the intersectionality, the service to the constituencies. I thought some of the support materials were super strong. I loved the examples of from Macho No Machismo. The artworks are great. Machos are mighty and know that they're strong. So gentle with others and don't use it for wrong. It's a great message, very, impactful for kids. I scored them down on accessibility a little bit and on marketing. I felt like the marketing plan desperately needs some specifics, and it, a little bit more about how they would speak to some of the specific audience sectors. But other than that, I thought it was a strong application.
Thank you. Secondary, Margaret?
Boy, Mike took a lot of my comments. I also found it a strong application. I mean, yeah, there's a lot there, but I think this artist is doing a lot of work, and particularly in schools, along with really enjoying seeing the pages of the book and the work samples. I enjoyed seeing the pictures of the author in the schools, interacting with children and sharing his work with them. So there's great messaging there, reaching a lot of, communities within Austin, key constituencies, and I want to see this book in the flesh.
Thank you, Margaret. Do other panelists have comments to add? Anything that hasn't already been stated? Constructive feedback, things we liked?
Yeah, I did. I feel like the same that Mike's already said, that it checked the boxes. But I was left with, like, when we got to the cultural activity section, and I didn't find the way to really address this in scoring, is that I didn't really understand the proposed activities and how they were going to impact his proposed audience. They're defined in there, but how the constituents involved are actually going to have a benefit from this more than just hearing a message. And that's really, like, I just didn't feel like the depth of what, if there's more than that this applicant is trying to get to, I did not find it in the explanation. There's a lot in here about the personal project that this applicant is performing. His book, his one-man play, his reading, the audience he's going, admirable to be going to schools for this messaging. But I just really didn't understand the bigger creative goal. I didn't think it was expressed in here in a succinct way. I didn't understand one of the core things of the entire grant application is, how is this audience really going to walk away with something, opportunity, and something bigger from this, more than just a message, right? That's really the question that I had. So I more propose that question, I think.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Any additional comments? All right.
If there are no further comments, thoughts that you have that have not been shared already? Seeing as there are no additional comments, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Mike, Margaret, Susan, Amrita, and Barb. Thank you, everyone. Next application up for review is the Austin Troubadours. Margaret and Mike are our primary and secondary. And Margaret, whenever you're ready to begin.
The Austin Troubadours, they are seeking funding for a program called Mediterranean Journey, which will present and examine the musical and cultural ties between different ethnic groups and nationalities of Eastern Mediterranean. The Troubadours is an international group of instrumentalists and singers whose mission is to revive musical masterpieces from medieval and Renaissance Europe. So certainly niche, And they feel that the concerts, the programs, the musical program will blend the music of Christians, Arabs, Jews, and they reference medieval Spain. I know they perform throughout Austin, and they say they're serving African American constituencies by performing regularly at George Washington Carver Museum, and they offer pay what you can tickets. The group of performers is primarily comprised of former foreign-born performers. So they feel they're serving immigrant constituencies in that way. And really, it's for a series of, not only the performances, exhibitions of instruments, a comparative exhibition of instruments and in modern instruments. The budget's reflective of the project, but does not include expenses related to accessibility. So those are my notes.
Thank you. Secondary?
I felt like that the clearest thing about the application is the artistic excellence and sort of the level of what they're presenting as artists and musicians is undeniable. They have all the experience, they have all this, it's highly demonstrated. The challenge I had is that that's kind of all that's demonstrated to me. It talks a lot about them, but I don't understand the specifics about their audience, about how they're serving people, other than we play shows and they're great, and people come and they're impacted by that. That's valuable for sure, but the grant's asking for more. An example would be like the intersectionality answer doesn't talk about intersectionality at all. It's kind of a description of how they collaborate. Here's a list of artists that play together. And they're from different backgrounds, but I don't know that implies to me intersectionality. It doesn't, there's just not the specifics, in the culture activities section, they talk about what they're going to do, and then they make sort of a general statement about xenophobia and Islamophobia on a macro scale, but there's no how. How do you, other than people come and listen to the music from other cultures, how else do you serve your constituencies? I thought there was some questions on their accessibility services, and there's nothing in budget for it, which kind of infers that, well, we just provide it, but I don't know that. They said they provided it in the past, but it doesn't specifically say that they do anywhere. There's more, but I'm going to get out of the way.
All right, additional comments from panelists? Things we liked, didn't like, constructive feedback.
Yeah, I just feel like a number of the questions could have been answered with more detail to the key constituents. Again, I think it's a lot of that was left out, and some of what Mike is talking about is like, had they put some of that in there, I think we would have been getting more of these details that were not clear in this, if they more followed the guidelines to answer the question.
Yeah, the difficulty here is, I think that if I'm guessing, I think that they probably are serving a lot of key constituencies and are doing a great job with it based on their history, but it doesn't say so here. I feel like they're not answering the questions that were asked. All I know is I know a lot about them. I don't know much about anything else.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Susan, do you want to contribute? All right. Any last comments on this application? Okay.
Seeing as there are no additional comments, thoughts that you have that haven't been stated by others. Seeing none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Mike, Margaret, Amrutha, Susan. Barbara, did you need more time to finalize your score, or were you done? Okay, just wanted to make sure. Great, thank you. We will move on to our next application then. Our next application up for review is Anastasia Shimansky, our Surrey Art Studio. Amrutha and Margaret are our primary and secondary, and Amrutha, whenever you're ready to begin.
So Anastasia Shimansky is a artist. She's from the Russian community, and she's been in Austin for 7 to 8 years now. And their proposed activity, which they are asking for the budget through this grant, is celebration of various Russian national holidays, and then games and celebration of Women's Day with the 4 members of the Russian community. And they say that the desired result for these activities is to maintain Russian culture and traditions, and to give the future generations the opportunity to communicate in Russian, and so on. So when they are talking about intersectionality, they are talking about how Russian culture is not just a religious concept, but it has within its fold Orthodox Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, and people of other faiths, and so on. So I felt that the application did a lot of talking about what it was that they wanted to celebrate, and the art studio and the artist herself, but they did not really touch upon how it would benefit other members of the communities that the city is targeting through these grants. So it was more focused on the Russian community, but not how other community members, other people in Austin would benefit from having, or whether they were even invited or a part of these celebrations. So it was, from the face of it, it did not seem as if it was intended to be an inclusive activity. And then accordingly, the budgets were for these specific events, and did not really have much budget for artists themselves. So it was just for one particular artist that they wanted the budget for. And the rest was mostly supplies and things like that. So yeah, that's what the application was all about.
Thank you. Secondary, Margaret.
She really packs a lot in here, doesn't she? She is wanting to highlight Russian culture and celebrate Russian culture. Her application, she mentions all training will be in Russian. So I worry about other languages and other populations at the events that she plans to arrange. Again, she touches upon, or I wanted, the Russian diaspora, including all those identities that, it's Russians, Ukrainians, Georgians, Latvians, etc. I enjoyed seeing the images of people in the studio and enjoying her events. Oh, why am I struggling? I feel like there's so much packed in here that it's almost, it's lacking clarity by trying to do so much with the dollars that she seeks. And I almost wish in a way she may have been less ambitious to really lay out her plan and how she plans to spend the money.
All right.
Thank-
Are there any sorry, go ahead.
No,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Any additional comments from panelists?
Yeah, I mean,
Really
I guess the biggest issue here is that this application just doesn't, it certainly describes a group of people who currently internationally are under fire. But it isn't a group of people that in Austin is in danger of erasure or has been underfunded by the city of Austin. There's not that demonstrated in the application, and the specifics of the application requirements are in fact those key constituents, which aren't really addressed in this application at all. So kind of leaves us, even though it's cool programming and something, again, I would probably go to some of it, but it just isn't something that fits the guidelines. So.
Thank you, Barbara. Any additional comments on this one?
I think that some of it maybe it feels like there's some language challenge here. I think it reads the same way that Barbara's describing it. I think it reads as a more macro, broad the sort of discussion of Russian culture and Russian history even. I would just encourage them in future applications to be really specific about how does that walk and talk and live and breathe here in Austin, other than that this is just where you are, that's made clear, but how can you, or what are the constituencies that you're going to impact in Austin and how?
Thank you. Margaret, were you looking to add anything?
I was just looking at the section about the marketing plans, and they seem very broad and not as tactical maybe as I had hoped to see.
Thank you. Any additional comments from panelists? All right, thank you.
Seeing as there are no further comments, no thoughts you have not covered by others. If not, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Amrita and Mike, Margaret, Barb. And Susan. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we are just about right on schedule to take our next break, so we will pause the.
I'm first, right?
And we are back from break, continuing our Elevate review panel. Next application up for review is East Austin Writing Project. Barbara and Amrita are our primary and secondary. And Barbara, whenever you're ready, let me get my timer ready. All right, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay, so East Austin Writing Project is actually applying for multidisciplinary events, including multidisciplinary artists and writers, But specific programming from those artists, is expected. It's not described very fully, but it is clear that this organization, has a dedication to the core audience that is part of the public grant process. Cultural leadership has been serving in the capacity of serving that community as well. That both with history and with leadership. Their actual events appear to be writing workshops, poetry night, literary salon, and a performance series showcase, which has a series of events, but it doesn't explain exactly how many events will be part of that process. Overall, the application shows that they are really interested in serving the community with dedicated outcomes for involved in the writing project. I felt like there was some information that could have been a little bit more helpful in here regarding the actual project, and seeing how exactly some of the proposed events were going to have potential positive outcomes for the people who would be participating. It's clear that is a goal of the organization as a whole. But there wasn't an explanation in here with specifics. The intersectionality is also clear. I think the applicant demonstrated that. They're not really doing anything beyond standard ADA, but they are proposing some language components additionally within the core application proposed events. And I would say the marketing efforts could have been more detailed. I feel like a lot of people are marking the specific, putting a category for the specific things the city is looking for as far as outreach, but not giving us enough detail. And this application definitely did not give much detail on exactly what kind of partnerships specifically to reach certain audiences would be helpful if people would include that. The budget does include payments to artists, but there was some confusion in the budget. The programming for each event is not specific in the application, and so the budget allocations are a bit confusing because of that. There appear to be a number of artists represented to be paid in the budget, but they're not reflected in the actual programming events listed. And overall, I think it's an admirable program. It seems like they've had some success according to what they've documented in here. The education opportunities are really impressive, and but more information on how the organization sets their goals to assist new writers and artists and how they continue to thrive in the group would have helped assess the program a little bit better. So that's it for me.
Thank you. I did notice one thing before we move on to the secondary for the performance series showcase. It does say in item number 4 there, ASL interpreter for 5 of the 8 performances, in A for 3. So just to that comment about how many were in there, it's a little bit further down, but it does appear to be 8. And I was glancing at the budget very quickly as well and saw 8 in there.
8. Okay, so I'll correct that. Thank you.
Secondary, Amrita?
So I really like the whole premise of the East Austin writing project, and they have been working at it for some time now, and they are like the ask for this particular grant application is for writing workshops, poetry night, literary salon, and performance series showcase. So they have detailed about where they will have these events and what they kind of, if there is a element of income generation, how they are going to do that, and if not, then what, where they are going to have it, and what are the key constituents and all that. So I like the way that they had itemized all these details about the particular events. An interesting part of how they have addressed intersectionality is they have approached it from the point of view of outcomes. So they've talked about how different target groups that we have in the Thrive and Elevate grants, they come together through the medium of poetry, and then they discover something about themselves that wasn't there, or probably they were not able to speak up, but through the medium of poetry that kind of happened. So as a poet, for me, it's kind of very interesting that they have picked up on this outcome specific and then put it as intersectionality and how that is addressed through poetry. Marketing, yes, they could have detailed it a little bit more, but they probably just using what they are already doing and just putting that out there, and how they will talk about it or talk about the events on Do 512 and 365 things to do in Austin and things like that. So I really like the application and I really like the work that they are doing. So yeah.
Thank you. Are there additional comments related to this application? And constructive feedback?
I wanted to say that I think it's admirable. You know, in the writing community, it's relatively easy to find a writing community where people get together and just talk about it and talk about writing. A lot of people want to do that. It's rare to find a community where they're doing something and there's actual opportunity provided. And I think that's here. And I feel like that was an admirable part of the application. I do think it would be helpful if they, you just look at your budget, and if there's something you're saying that you're paying for, just make sure that it's reflected in the narrative somewhere. Use it as a map, but I think it's a strong application, and I'm glad they sent it.
Additional comments from panelists? All right.
If there are no further comments, thoughts you have that haven't been stated by panelists already? Seeing as there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Susan, Barb, Amruta, Margaret. And Mike. All right, thanks everyone. All right, the next application up for review is Flores Market. Susan and Barbara are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Flores Market is proposing a public activity, a Latin Fest. It's a 2-day activity proposed for December 14th and 15th from 2 to 6 at Canopy in East Austin. And it's a mixture of activities, food and handmade vendors pop up, music acts. It'll have an art exhibit and creative workshops provided by craft. They'll be doing mask making and traditional Mexican embroidery. They ask in their budget for $30,000. All the funds will be used to fund this 2-day event. They have a documented history since 2022 of providing services. This is the second time that they've hosted this Latin Fest. They've addressed accessibility and marketing to the community. They propose that all of their entertainment will be by Latin artists. That's it.
Thank you. Secondary, Barbara?
So pretty much everything Susan said is I think they've met all. They definitely have a history with this constituency, all of that. They already have a built-in audience, and what they're proposing sounds like a pretty cool event that again I would like to go. I think the probably the only section of this application that I thought was not quite up to what the question was in the marketing. I thought that their marketing was a little light for an event that has the potential like this to really draw an audience, especially in regard to the potential for tourism. I think tourism throughout the state. So I just think they're proposing something pretty cool that might have a larger audience. And I didn't really see them addressing that section of it in a way that the rest of the application fulfills. And the budget seemed reasonable. I mean, they've done this before, so clearly they have some understanding of what the costs are. I believe everything that we were expecting is in here. It seems kind of light what they have for ASL services though at $300. That's the only other thing that, I mean, I know what we pay in for a 2-day event, that would be a lot more than that. But maybe that's only a portion of their budget again. Maybe this event like this would cost far more than $30,000. So perhaps it's just not built into this portion of it. But that was it. I think it's a really worthy, fit the guidelines, very good application. So.
Great, thank you. Are there additional comments from panelists related to this application? Yes, Margaret?
I have a question in the budget and eligibility, and it doesn't really have to be answered here, but I see expenses for bar setup and bartenders, and I don't know if those are eligible expenses. They are, okay. Great, that was my question.
Thank you, Margaret. Additional comments from panelists, things that haven't been stated yet, Mike?
I did notice the same thing about accessibility in the low budget. I also noticed that they are only proposing one fluent Spanish speaker on site. And I just wonder how one Spanish speaker can, serves an event of this size and scope. If they're, how do people, gain that benefit to kind of accomplish that goal?
Thank you, Mike. Any additional comments? All right.
If there are no further comments from the panel, thoughts you have that have not been stated? Seeing as there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Barbara, Amrutha, Mike, Margaret, and Susan. Thank you, everyone. All right, next application up for review is 3240 Entertainment Group LLC. Susan and Mike are our primary and secondary. And Susan, whenever you're ready to begin.
Okay. 3240 Entertainment Group is proposing to do a reality experiencing showcasing historically Black churches in Austin Black neighborhood as part of some work that they've done in the past. Let me see what it's called. History Around Us. And so this project would begin in, production will begin in 2024. They've identified some churches that they want to visit. And it would be completed in June of 2025. The author of the proposal has extensive experience in this. He's completed history all around us. He's done some things for Austin Public Access TV. And their budget is in keeping with that. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Secondary, Mike?
I think it's a really exciting proposal. I think it's a great use of technology to serve a key constituency and connect them with important history and geographies. I think they do a good job of making sure that equity is represented and accomplish a lot of the goals of the grant. The thing that I'm left wondering is I would love to have heard more details about how it actually works. When you're talking about an augmented reality experience, I feel like they're assuming some knowledge that we just don't have. We can't see we're not seeing what they see. How does the user experience it? Is this an app? Do you use it on your phone? Do you pick up? They talk about there's a laptop or an iPad, which I think might be used for part of the tour. How does it work? And I think if they would flesh that out for us, I think we would have it'd be easier to judge how successful it can be. That was, one thing that I felt lacking. It's not, for a lot of activities, we all know what it means to go to an art opening. We all know what it means to watch a documentary in a theater. This could mean many, many different things.
Thank you. Are there additional comments from panelists related to this application? Yes, Margaret.
For me, the narrative about marketing felt very broad and less tactical. And then the budget expenses related to marketing felt different for something different. So there might be just a disconnect there. And what they're describing, I will say, as far as how it works, there was a great news story about the History All Around Us project at the Capitol, and that showed people interfacing with the technology. So that sample may have answered those questions about how it works, but it wasn't necessarily included in the narrative.
Great, thank you. Mike, I think you
Mike, you're muted. You're muted, Mike.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say I looked at some of that same stuff, and I thought it was great examples of the past work, but it doesn't say that's how it's going to work. It doesn't say that's what they're doing, and so I think we're left to sort of, extrapolate.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is a really ambitious project, and it seems pretty cool. And it also seems to me what they didn't really talk as much about that had an opportunity to do in a bigger tourist way, et cetera, is that what a great way to connect young people to a history of something that's actually kind of going away somewhat, churches and that kind of community, and that community, especially in Austin. And so I do think there's a real opportunity within their marketing, et cetera, that wasn't really quite addressed. And this person's had a history, though, of doing some interesting projects. So I kind of, to your point, Mike, sort of took it for granted that though she's thinking of all those things, but maybe not, I don't know. It would have been, I agree, it would have been helpful to hear a little bit more about how they were going to pull it off. And even in another sense, just a broader, I felt like the budget didn't really fulfill some of the things in here. There were assumptions that I found a little bit confusing, and it was like, I'm not sure that it did seem to me a small budget for something that seems this big, seemed big, you know, and cool. So
Yeah, I did notice a couple of places where they were talking about, with more budgeting, we could do this or we could do that. And so that all implies, maybe this is the kind of the hidden question here. And like, I want to be clear about what my concern was, is if they don't say, how does it work? Well, the question behind that is, do they know? Do you know how this works? Or is this something that you're kind of an idea that you're proposing and we're going to figure it out depending on if you get the money, that sort of thing? And I don't really, they have a strong track record and they definitely, I think that we can trust that they have experience here. So that's helpful, but it would have been more helpful. And I think I would have been able to score them higher in a couple of places if they would have been more specific about what they were doing.
Thank you. Any additional comments? All right, thank you.
I will say, and I don't know if this answers the specificity question that the panelists are mentioning. Staff has only done a cursory glance, but looking at the proposed activities, they do talk a little bit about augmented reality. Where did I find it? This initiative aims to engage local residents through interactive storytelling, virtual tours, and educational media displays that display history where they stand. Audiences will be able to see how the neighborhood used to look through their mobile device, and educational voiceovers, texts, and images will immerse them in an experience that leaves a priceless mark on their perspective of the neighborhood. So offers a little bit, maybe not the level of detail that y'all are looking for, but just pointing out that there is that description there in the activities description.
Yeah, that is helpful. Maybe try to express this more. This is more of an opportunity for the applicant. If you blow this out and show us some, some artist renderings and show us how this thing works, I think we get even more excited about it. Instead of trying to have okay, what does it mean to, those words that you just read? What does that look like?
We have just under 2 minutes left. Any additional thoughts or comments on this application? Margaret?
I do want to add a note that I think this is a great project to bring forth the stories that maybe had been destroyed, marginalized, and not shared. And so, getting more stories about the Black community and Black churches really is the key element here for me.
Thank you, Margaret.
A little over a minute. Any final thoughts or comments? If there are no additional comments on this application, if you would please, panelists, please finalize your scores and let me know when you've done so. Barb, Mike, Margaret, Amrita, and Susan, I see you're nodding your head. Okay, everyone is done. Thank you. Next application up for review is Essentials Creative. Mike and Barb are our primary and secondary. And Mike, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, Essentials Creative is seeking $30,000 to create an installation, a collaborative installation with it's really interactive. At the at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. This is a very interesting application. They've good identification of key constituencies. It's well thought out. They definitely have experience with this kind of work and making this kind of art installation. One thing that's very impressive to me is how consistent the narrative, the central concept of rhizomes, which is what this is based on, is through the whole thing. I can tell you I learned a lot about rhizomes reading this application that I did not know. And they really do take this idea and use it as not just as a metaphor, but it's really practically built into how they're making the art, which I think is awesome and is admirable. The places I thought I would have liked to see something different, accessibility, I thought there needed to be more implementation, more of a how. With, I thought they did some good goals, but I wasn't sure how they were gonna do it really. The marketing plan, I felt like didn't speak to the audience sectors that are listed in the question. And in this situation, I felt like maybe their kind of adherence to the language about growth and flowers and stuff was maybe a little limiting. They use cross-pollination, take root, intertwine, branch out, all within the marketing. And that's all beautiful storytelling, but how are you going to do it? And even the practical things, they say we're going to engage our audience, but they don't say how. We're going to leverage our social media. They don't say how. So just more sort of deliverables and more tactical marketing. But I think it's a really interesting and cool and exciting project.
Thank you, Barb.
So I don't want to repeat anything Mike said, obviously, but I think he covered pretty much all of my thoughts about this project as well. Can't say that I ever thought I'd see the word rhizome in an art project, and I actually didn't do great in that class, and so I had to go look it up. so it was, but I will say, from the perspective of not comparing this to anybody else's application, but I'm just saying from the perspective of the definitions that the city has given us in this application process, they really didn't seem to be stretching to meet those. They seem to be really have thought through what an interesting thing to kind of bring botany and concept into a broad cultural landscape and address it specifically within that landscape. I just found it fascinating, and I thought it seemed like, kind of this cool, it was sort of the definition too of intersectionality in a way. And it was something that I think will serve a broad audience, So I see they're doing this in other places other than Austin, and all of the materials they gave us were really helpful, I thought. And I just would agree with Mike in here regarding the marketing, et cetera. I just felt like that was the place that wasn't as, that could have been stronger to show how they're going to reach people here. It also seems like a really thin marketing budget, from in the budget section. So, and I don't know what portion of this Ladybird Wildflower Center is going to be funding or not. So it might have been helpful to give us more detail about that partnership that they're doing, because it is a really interesting partnership. So anyway, that was it.
All right, thank you. Are there any additional comments from panelists related to this application? Anything that hasn't been stated yet? Okay, thank you.
Looks like there's no additional thoughts, diverging opinions, comment, or thought you have that has not been stated by one of the panelists already. If not, if you would please finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Mike, Barb, Amruta, Susan, and Margaret. All right, thank you, everyone. Next application up for review is Active Captive. Margaret and Mike are our primary and secondary, and Margaret, whenever you are ready to begin.
Sure. Active Captive, the group seeks funding for neurodivergence in music. Its key constituencies are neurodivergent individuals who belong to Austin's BIPOC community. Their artistic goal is to facilitate public events combining live music, notable local speakers, and wellness activities to create a safe space for people of color to voice their lived experiences in neurodivergence. They really want to create a platform where the stories are shared and where The neurodivergent BIPOC musicians find community. They note that no one else in Austin focuses on this type of experience. The founder and several of the active captive members are part of the BIPOC and neurodivergent communities. And it says they proposed activity is to offer 2 live music events featuring active, captive, and other Austin artists. The events will also incorporate practices of yoga and meditation into the events. And the group plans to collaborate with several Austin-based organizations, from the Real Queens Fix Each Other's Crowns to masscultura.org, as well as appeal to a number of online platforms. So those are my notes about the ask.
Thank you.
Okay. At the top, I'll say this one, I'm all over the place on this one. This one is one where I'm having an argument with myself all day, every day about trying to figure out what I think. So hopefully I'll learn something from the conversation. So I think that the key constituencies are great. The goal is admirable. And I think this is an extremely well-written application. It's lovely. The speech it's a very strong writer. The problem I have is I feel like maybe this is a situation where if this is a band, that's what they are. My background is in live music, 30 years. This is a band doing shows. The only real if you look at what they're actually saying they're going to do, there are 4 different places in the application where they describe in multiple sentences that all this is they showcase bands that have members in the band who are BIPOC and represent a neurodivergent community. Okay, that's great and that's admirable, but that's the bulk of all of this. And so my question is, I'm not saying that there's no merit here, there's great merit, but how it's hard for me to judge what level some of these categories should be scored at. So I've been really looking for a how, or how else do they do it other than we have songs and band members that are representative of this community. And the only thing that's in here is they do talk about they want to have local speakers, they want to have yoga. There are 6 local speakers in their budget. They plan to have wellness professionals in yoga. But other than that, everything in here is just stuff that bands do. We're going to have a mailing list. We're going to have merch. We're going to have shows. We're going to rent backline. And so I'm at a real crossroads here of whether or not, I think these are admirable goals. I'm just not sure at the level of value that is provided to the constituencies.
Thank you. Jasmine, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say any additional comments. Yeah, it's Barbara.
I feel like I had the same feelings that Mike did. And in this, because I didn't find the information in this application that made this more than just the band. And though it says they're planning to have multiple bands and yoga and things at these events, I don't understand from the questions that are actually in the city's application, how are they tying the bigger creative concepts into this audience? Where's the data on the audience? That's what I'd really like to see as well, because I see the data on the band, not the audience. And I see articles, I agree with Mike, it was really well written. I see articles on neurodivergence in the community and how, like the percentages and other data that are sort of general public, broader outside of Austin. but I don't see anything that tells me that there's a broad neurodivergent BIPOC audience where they're going to be programming to that audience with creative input and outcomes and opportunities for those people beyond that. And that is what the application asks for. So though it is well written, it doesn't answer some really key questions for me that make it more than just a proposal for an artist to continue performing their services for the general public. I didn't think that the materials that they submitted to us in this, I think that represented their argument. I felt like they were very sort of general materials, and they didn't show me in the assessment process how to see that this is going to be a true value to a subset of a culture in Austin that we may just be unaware of, you know? So, so I felt like it was really well written, but it didn't contain some key elements.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You know, nowhere in here in the application do they say they're a band. For a while, I was trying to figure out, what are they? Are they a group of producers? Are they event promoters? Is it just a kind of a creative collective, all of which are perfectly valid? But it almost to me feels like they're trying to hide the fact that they're a band with a history, which I wish they would just have said. We're a band, we've been playing these shows, we play shows all the time. They're kind of, it feels like you're trying to frame it as this is a specific thing that we do that is very specific to this community. I don't think that's the case. I think they're just a band that plays out, and I think this is their goal, and I think it's an admirable goal. But it feels like it doesn't feel, I don't know. I feel like I'm not getting the whole story here.
I will say, when we talk about key constituencies in the application, we do say key constituencies are not necessarily just your audience. They may also include others who are deeply impacted by your work, like participating artists, staff, creative advisors, and/or community groups. And then in their response, they mentioned somewhere, I was looking at it, that they've been showcasing 2 bands per year that are at the intersection of BIPOC and neurodivergence, including in their own band. So they do, in the sentence, it said something like bands and artists. So they do talk about that in there. We've got 1 minute and 45 seconds left. Additional comments or thoughts on this application?
Their attachment did show their band.
That's
flyer,
right.
the flyer.
It's in the support materials. It's just not anywhere in the narrative. That's where, to me, it felt like, oh, now I look at the support materials and here's flyers, you guys playing at the Mohawk because that's your event. And it did 2 shows a year with some bands that represent this community. It's not that there's no value here. I'm just having trouble gauging the level of impact that it has on the key constituencies.
Other thoughts or comments on this application?
Margaret?
And maybe, I don't know that this helps answer the question, but I have a note here that it feels like it's a relatively new organization or band that identified a need in a community and is for and by its community. So neurodivergent musicians acknowledging that and playing to, and possibly including yoga to help with healing.
Yeah, I get that's what they're saying.
20,
You know,
closer to 15 seconds now. Additional final thoughts on this application? And all right, if there are no further comments, timing is stopped for this application, so we're not discussing it. But yeah, lean into your equity training, lean into looking beyond the grantsmanship as you can as you are scoring this application. We'll go ahead and let you finalize your scores, and then just let me know when you have done so.
I
Susan,
want some
see
extra
you
time
nodding
with
your-
this. If that is like, I don't want to make everyone sit here and just watch me for 10 minutes, stare at this thing. Is there a way, can I finalize this at the end of the day or something?
We are scheduled for one other break. We were going to try and power through because Margaret did have a 3:30. But if we want to take, it sounds like others are maybe need a little bit of time to think on this one as well. Let's go ahead and take a 10-ish minute break. It's 2:58. Let's come back at 3:10. So we'll call it a 12-minute break.
Thank you.
And y'all can kind of think on that application. Then we've got like 2 or 3 more after this. So even if it's not a bio break for you. Oh, and we will go ahead and pause the recording. Yes. And we are back from break, finishing up our review panel for Elevate. Next application up for review is Dragon Wolf. Amruta and Margaret are our primary and secondary. And Amruta, whenever you are ready to begin.
So this application is by Dragon Wolf. They are a multidisciplinary circus performer, and their key constituencies that they describe are performance artists, circus artists, painters, graphic designers, installation creators, small businesses, and underrepresented populations. They are themselves from, I think, Iran is what they mention in their application. And they are seeking funding for a series of events which consists of cutting-edge, multi-dimensional, immersive circus and theater experiences that immersive experiences that combine music, circus, art, and live performance at various Austin venues in 2024 and 2025. And they intend to create a community of sorts through this. And when I went online and tried to look at their performances, I mean, the visuals are stunning. And I really liked the way that they have talked about different audiences and performers, and they have quantified through various surveys who their previous performers were. So that part of the application was interesting. However, they do not really go about in detail on what exactly do they mean by intersectionality, or what exactly do they mean by their key constituencies being people that really need that support. So they talk about performers, and they talk about performers having suffering from various issues, and they being the members of LGBTQIA plus communities, but that is mentioned but not really described in detail, which is what I was looking for in the application. Also in their marketing, they talk about the huge billboard ads and everything. What I wanted them to mention was if the performances would be ticketed, and they did not mention that anywhere in their application. So if the performances are ticketed, if people actually, audiences pay to watch their performances, then how does that kind of go with the grant money is what I was trying to see, but that was not evident in the budget part of the application. So yeah, interesting things, interesting performance art, but not really something that hits the mark. Yeah.
Thank you. Secondary, Margaret?
In reviewing this application, Dragon Wolf, I wondered if there was a name change at a certain point from Astra Circus to Dragon Wolf. So that's how I found some images. And it talked about its constituencies being artists and small businesses and vendors, which may or may not kind of match up with the with those applications seeking to fund. They do talk about admission, but offering free and low-cost admission and mentoring artists and creating opportunities for creative and small businesses. The applicant also mentions that the organizations raised awareness and funds to fight sexual abuse, suicide prevention, and serving the unhoused. Certainly marginalized communities or communities that need some focus. Dollars are going to a series of events. His marketing plan includes some amount of detail and where the funding would go to create the series, but I wasn't quite sure how his identified key constituencies and the applications or the grants goals, if they aligned completely. Those are my notes.
Thank you, Margaret. Are there additional comments from panelists, things that have not been stated yet?
I'm a huge fan of circus arts, and I'm glad that they're out there doing what they're doing, and I wish them the very best. I'd love to go to their show. To me, the main issue with the application is the key constituencies. What they've listed, which is allowable, is to say it's our performers, it's our artistic community, and that's fine. But I don't think that that's a community that is at risk of cultural erasure or displacement. I think you can make an argument that artists have been marginalized or underfunded, but that kind of puts that at a lower scoring point. I also wanted to note that they give some demographics about their past performers. 74% are white. They do state it in the converse. They say 26% are not white, but the math, that's clever, but the math is of course the other way too. So I feel like it's a that I don't think that there's any danger of cultural erasure here.
Thank you. Any additional comments? All right, thank you.
If there are no further comments, thoughts that you have that have not been stated by someone else already? Seeing as there are none, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Mike, Margaret, Barb, Amruta, and Susan. All righty, thanks everyone. And then our final application up for review today is Mohammed Farouzi. Barbara and Amruta are primary and secondary. And Barb, whenever you're ready to begin.
Ready to begin. So this applicant is a musician, and they are proposing for their public activity to throw a concert to target concert goers of all ages and social backgrounds. In the description of the event, they have a lot of information about what they plan to do marketing wise, but they don't really give details of the specific event. So it looks like they're just trying to do a single concert with no details of who would be playing or when it would be in this time frame. And regarding key constituency, they really talk about his music, and he has a history, quite a long history, of an audience here in Austin, and then also serving the school districts with his musical education. definitely has been a part of the music community for a long time. And I listened to the music and it's really wonderful. I wasn't aware of him, but I would like to go to the shows. But I don't really see enough details in the application about, because there's not really much more in the way of a proposal for the actual event. I don't see a lot of detail also about how intersectionality, how within their audience, how they're going to create an event artistically that will serve the demographic that we're talking about here, how it will consider them in the programming, how it will consider, have outcomes for the audience through this program. A lot of the questions, honestly, in the proposal or answers in the proposal are literally a sentence or two at most. And so there's a lot of information that I just don't have in order to assess the application. Because of that, the budget just seems hard for me to see hard for me to know if it's even accurate. It has $4,000 for payment to artists. I mean, it checks the boxes in one way, but it doesn't in the sense that it looks like there's 10 artists, but I can't tell if that's just from one band or if there's going to be other music or other events that they're going to be paying for at this event. They have marketing that I can't tell if that's actual advertising they're buying on those stations and in that, or if it's just they're planning to do a mix of promotion and marketing. So there's just a lot of detail that is just missing from this application. I feel like it would be something that would have a broad audience appeal and possibly have an audience that fits this grant program, but I just can't tell it from the application. So.
Thank you. Secondary, Amruta?
Yeah, it's interesting what they have laid out. So they want concert goers of all ages and social background, but they're also talking about refugees from Iran, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and the Middle East. So that is how they're talking about how intersectionality is incorporated in their activities. But then they're also talking about in their budget, $1,000 allocation for transporting people with disabilities to the concert venue. They have mentioned only one, the Asian American Resource Center. Yeah, as their venue, which is $2,000 is what they are requesting. So I think that they want to have that concert at that particular venue. But yeah, there is a lot of things that I'm assuming, or I have to assume to finish reading through the application. But it would have been better if I had more information, because the work that they have done as a band, Atash, and as a musician themselves is quite phenomenal. So this, like, and also they are applying as a non-profit, but they have still asked for $30,000, which is the individual artist grant, I think, money. So yeah, so I think the application needed a little more work, is what I thought from it. But I hope the concert happens and it would be a great event to look forward to.
Thank you. Are there additional comments from panelists? Yes, Margaret?
I wanted to note his letters of support. Both were very positive about his ability to connect with children in schools, and he sounds quite personable. So so where it might be lacking in description in the application, the letters say that he's dynamic with the kids.
Thank you, Margaret. Are there additional comments?
I think this is the band is undeniably talented and experienced. The music's great. I think that unfortunately, I think if we just knew more, I think if the application was more fleshed out, they might be a great fit for this, in a lot of these questions, but there's just not enough information there. And the information we have, they describe a really, I'm pulling for them, and I hope that they do great. It's just they're not answering the questions we're asking. They're describing a broad constituency. They're saying, he says that most of his audience will come from over 100 miles away. That's not an Austin-based constituency. I think that I hope it applies again, and if we can maybe just focus more on the specific goals of this particular funding application and see if you can find something that fits it.
Can I just
Margaret?
add, for audiences more than 100 miles away, I will say tourists are one of the audiences that's trying to be reached.
Yes, thank you for that, Margaret. We have just over 2 minutes left on this application. Any additional comments, thoughts? I will note I've been kind of glancing through the application, so I'm not finding the comment that was made about them being a nonprofit organization. I mentioned earlier in a different application that there's sections 1 and 2 that the panelists cannot see, and so in that section they did mark individual and creative business. So they are not a nonprofit. They are applying as an individual or creative business. And by creative business, all we mean is someone without federal 501c nonprofit status. They could be a state of Texas nonprofit, for instance. I didn't see that in here, but just saying that as an example. Just over 1.5 minutes left. Any other thoughts or comments on this application? Items that you have that have not been stated by others already? Seeing as there are no other comments, if you would please, panelists, finalize your scores and let me know when you have done so. Barb, Margaret, Margaret, Amruta, I think I saw your hand. I think y'all were on my screen in different places before. That's why it's like, wait a minute. Mike, and then Susan, I see you nodding your head. All right, and that concludes our, let me make sure I'm correct. That was our final application. It was. So that concludes our panel for today. We will stop the recording.